Up next, we welcome the Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West. Please welcome Stuart Young, SC.
Thank you, Hans, to my colleagues, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. My task here this morning is quite an unfortunate one. We have come to address the political gimmickry, to use that phrase of the Prime Minister, and the sham that both herself and the Chief Secretary are attempting to pull on the people of Tobago and also us here in Trinidad. And it is the recent theatrics that took place, unfortunately, in the Tobago House of Assembly this week with the handing over of an alleged export license for aggregate product from the Studley Park quarry. The first thing I'd like to discuss with Trinidad and Tobago is the importance of aggregate and how aggregate is necessary for our road rehabilitation, the road construction, also the production of concrete in Trinidad and Tobago. We, over the past few years, have been attempting to do a lot of road rehabilitation. We all know it. We all experience the potholes daily throughout Trinidad and also Tobago. In fact, right now in Tobago, along their major highway, the Claude Noel Highway, there are areas that require immediate emergency work and rehabilitation. The aggregate product that is produced from Studley Park is world class, and in particular the armor rock that is produced from Studley Park. So really, it is to inform the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and more particularly Tobago, don't be fooled by any export license. The former PNM central government worked very hard with the THA to always ensure it was allowed to produce aggregate at the Studley Park quarry, and that is because that aggregate is needed. In fact, unfortunately, again, in the continuation of misinformation, we had Secretary Trevor James come out, I saw it in the newspapers today, and say a number of things. So let me start there. First of all, there would have been no order by the Ministry of Works to the Studley Park quarry over the last 2 years, because the Ministry of Works does not procure aggregate on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is handled by NIDCO. So you would see, and let him deny it, that there were orders being placed by NIDCO for the works. Then to say it was only used for the Diego Martin interchange, again, everybody knows that there was the construction of the Point Fortin to San Fernando Highway, and in particular, Mosquito Creek, where the best aggregate product and necessary aggregate product for that project would have come or should have come from Studley Park. Also, you had highways being built in the Grandee area. Then you would recall in the last 2 years, the coastal erosion that would have taken place in the Manzanilla-Mayaro area, where the road was literally washed away. Again, the aggregate product to repair those roads, to build those roads, the best product would have come from Tobago and Studley Park. The procurement would have been done by NIDCO and also contractors who awarded the contracts to do these road works. People, the main issue with export of aggregate from Studley Park is there is such huge local demand for this particular aggregate domestically in both Tobago and Trinidad that is not being satisfied, no matter how much you ask Studley Park quarry to produce it. It is a demand issue, and the demand that is the local domestic demand for repairing our own roads, both in Tobago and Trinidad, cannot be met by the Studley Park quarry. Forex, which is a big issue affecting all of us in Trinidad and Tobago. Unashamedly, you had the Minister of Finance tell the truth and say he himself as Minister of Finance could only get $200 when he went to the bank. Every single one of us, average and normal Trinidadians and Tobagonians, are being affected by a lack of forex. The decision that we took as the central government, the PNM, was we are not going to spend hard-earned, scarce foreign reserves, forex, US dollars, to import aggregate. if it can be provided right here in Tobago. In fact, in Trinidad, the former Prime Minister, myself as Minister of Energy, Minister Sinanan as Minister of Works and Transport, we went up to the Blanchisseuse Quarry, National Quarry. We did all that we could to try and produce this necessary aggregate here in Trinidad. Because if you have to import it, you're using the foreign exchange that could use better else in other areas. And this was the problem. So we said, listen, produce and supply for all of the domestic needs of Trinidad and Tobago, and then you can export. But that cannot even be done. In fact, one of the documents I'll leave with you today was in 2024, September 2024, NIDCO went out with a request for proposal for the supply and delivery of aggregates to try and get aggregate. And we even looked at importing aggregate. The Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago actually provided permission for importation of aggregate because the domestic supply had become so desperately short and so many issues with it that we could not get our road rehabilitation done. And you know what happened? So Cabinet approved, let us allow the importation of aggregate. They were looking at importing aggregate of the nature and type that is done by Studley Park, Tobago, all the way from Nova Scotia in Canada and also from St. Lucia. The former Prime Minister Rowley, and myself received calls, numerous requests from President Irfan Ali in Guyana, who have a serious infrastructure program going on, asking if we could export aggregate to Trinidad. And the response was, as soon as we've satisfied our own demand. So Cabinet took a decision because we needed the aggregate. It was not being produced by Studley Park and the other quarries in Trinidad. In fact, the national quarries up in Blanchisseuse that could also produce the types of aggregate needed. Unfortunately, when they went in, the geologist said it was unsafe and they had to stop the work being done there. So we went out. Let us allow the importation. We told contractors, go ahead, you bring in the aggregate. You go and source it and bring it in, which of course will arrive here at a higher cost more to maintain and to fix our roads and to build our roads in both Tobago and Trinidad. You know what happened next? NIDCO then comes back to Cabinet and says the contractors are asking for the government to provide the foreign exchange to buy aggregate. Again, when we are in a time where every citizen is complaining about a shortage of foreign exchange, why would we use and prioritize the use of our limited US dollars and foreign exchange to import aggregate when it can be produced right here in Tobago at Studley Park and hopefully in other areas in Trinidad? So that is the policy behind it. So don't be fooled now that, oh, you have an export license. So what is going to happen now? And I'm asking the Prime Minister, the Minister of Works and Transport, and all of those responsible. So the limited amount being produced in Tobago at Studley Park is now going to be exported. Where is the aggregate that we need going to come from? Where is the domestic demand? Where is the supply going to come from that? And don't keep misleading the people. Why would the Secretary for Infrastructure, Mr. Trevor James, say that no roads are being repaired and know that Ministry of Works doesn't place orders for aggregate? So say, well, there's no order placed by Ministry of Works for the last 2 years. Because all the orders were being placed by the contractors awarded the contracts as well as by NIDCO. These are the issues we're facing. You know, one of the things Senator Dan Paul and myself and other members have discussed, and I drew it to the country's attention. In 5 months, this UNC government has withdrawn $1 billion US. $1 billion US from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. In 5 months of being in office, they've taken out $400 million US. From our reserve accounts at the central bank, they have taken out $600 million. I was asking two of the leading banks in Trinidad and Tobago last week, did they get an increase in the supply of US dollars in the last 5 months? The unequivocal answer was no. So where has that US $1 billion gone that has now dropped our foreign reserves and our import cover, to almost 5 months? And when we go below that, we will end up at the IMF according to the formulas. And you now want to go and put us in the burden and the dangerous position of having to try and import aggregate that can be produced, the best aggregate, best armor rock in this whole region, some of it could be produced in Studley Park. That is where you're going to put us, just so you could hold up a piece of paper and again try to fool, unfortunately, the people of Tobago and Trinidad. So it was my duty here this morning as the former Minister of Energy and someone who did a lot of work to try. And I'll tell you, the experience with trying to get the blasting license for Studley Park, even the quarrying license, when the Ministry of Energy technocrats and public servants said, well, they couldn't get a renewal at Studley Park of their quarrying license because there were disputes over audits, etc. We, the central government, under my instructions, asked the public servants to just allow the Studley Park quarry to operate so we could get the aggregate, to allow them a license for periods, so they will always allow that. So the whole export conversation comes down to there is more than enough demand here in Trinidad and Tobago for the product that can be quarried at Studley Park, but more importantly, it was not being fulfilled. And when you have to import this aggregate because our roads require the work and the construction of the work, roads require this type of aggregate, it is going to cost us foreign exchange, forex, US dollars, that quite simply the priority should not rest on importing aggregate when we could have it produced here. So my questions, as I've laid out there, are where is the aggregate going to come from? Or is it that you're going to abandon the roads of Trinidad and Tobago? Or is it that you have contracts that you want to line up with specific people for the importation of this aggregate? And the question then becomes, where is the foreign exchange going to come from? Because we are seeing at the same time, literally, and this is not alarmist, this is not fear-mongering, you are literally seeing the collapse of the energy industry taking place in front of us, which is where our foreign exchange earnings come from. So people of Trinidad and Tobago, those are the facts. Those are the facts, unfortunately, all behind this simple export license. By all means, we want Studley Park Quarry to be successful. We want the people of Tobago to reach a position because there's a ready sale for it domestically. But if you're going to earn 10 US dollars, exporting it, 10 US dollars by your exports of the aggregate from Studley Park, but then the need for Trinidad and Tobago is going to cost us 100 US dollars. How does that make sense? Isn't it better that we supply our own needs, save our foreign exchange, allow the money, the inflows of money to Studley Park? And the last thing I'll say is, it is a fact that the last PNM central government did everything it could to assist Studley Park, whether it be for blasting licenses, whether it be for their quarry license. The sticking point may have been an export license, but only on the basis that I've just outlined to you, that there is more demand here in Trinidad and Tobago that could not be satisfied. You didn't want to use your foreign exchange to import something that you could produce right here. And there's an embarrassing story that when the former Prime Minister and Minister of Works, Prime Minister Rowley and Minister Sinanan, were going to visit Studley Park to see how they could help to increase production. Unfortunately, instructions came from above at the THA not to allow the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Minister of Works, Trinidad and Tobago, access to the Studley Park quarry. So the plea is, please do what is best for the island of Tobago and the island of Trinidad and the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Stop trying to fool the people. Stop. Where has the billion US dollars gone? And that is a question, is as unanswered, as is the question, no matter how many times it's asked, how many times I ask it, did NGC win the arbitration against SIS for the Beetham wastewater plant? What is the award? What are you doing about radio silence? I expect radio silence here. I expect some sort of political continued gimmickry and noise to be made. But people of Trinidad and Tobago, let it not be said that we did not come to you with the facts that are undisputable, as well as the dangers that lie ahead, especially with our foreign exchange. If our import cover falls any lower, the formulas, the international financial formulas dictate out of our control that we are going to end up in an IMF program. Is it that we're going to use our hard-earned, increasingly scarce US foreign exchange to import rocks to Trinidad and Tobago when we can produce these same rocks and aggregate right here in Trinidad and Tobago? So that is what I wanted to come and provide you with the facts, for you now to be armed with the truth and the facts, and for you to make your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Stuart Young, SC, Member of Parliament.